the log lines that saved vacation. Big hand to Mario, please.
Hello, hello. Okay. Hello, everyone. So my name is Mario Corchero, and I'm here to speak about logging. I'm not a core developer in logging or anything like that, but I had to work on some esoteric use cases of logging, and I thought it was giving some light on the model. So quickly, we're going to speak about why logging matters. It's important that I brought you into using logging before explaining how it's designed and how it works. And then we'll see how it works, how to use it, how to configure it. We'll do a little demo and simple use cases. I'm going to try to run really quickly over the slides because when I rehearsed it, it's 35 minutes, and I have 25. I think I was too verbose in the presentation. Don't worry, there's not going to be more bad jokes, okay? So, okay, first, why logging matters. So, I like to think on logging as the documentation for our runtime application. So it's quite often you are coding and you do your docstring and you do all the documentation for developers, but logging can be instrumenting your application with logging can be seen as the documentation and information you leave for these future people that is going to be trying to figure out why the application is not working when you are on holidays, and you really don't want them to call you. And I'm sure that happened. That has happened to you. And the key is applications in production are some kind of a black box, and instrumenting them is key to maintain them and to reason about them. Some purists will say you shouldn't use a debugger in development because it creates the bad habit of not instrumenting the application properly. If you overuse your debugger, you are indeed, the key is if you cannot reason about the application at the time you are working on it on dev, do you think you will be able to do it in production? So I'm not one of those purists. I'm not saying don't use debugger, but I'm saying think about how does your application look like when it's running and you are not coding on it, and how is it going to look like when it's running in production? Then the other thing is, the right tool for the right job and everything. So why should you use logging over print? There is a whole page in the documentation about it. But basically, logging has multi-threading support. It's much more flexible, and it has its configurability. I don't know if even that's a word. And you can categorize your logs. And the key, something I really like about logging is probably how it's designed, is the fact that it splits the how and the what you're logging. So logging is some kind of a collaborative approach to instrumenting your application. And when you log, as a developer, for example, working on a library, you just say what you want to log without having to say how you log it. It's going to be the decision of the person which configures the application to run to decide how those logs that you wrote are going to appear in stdout, in a file, or whatever, and how are they going to be formatted and everything. So, okay, let's see in Python how does this work. Anyone does Java in the room? Okay, cool. So if you know log4j, this is going to be a really similar story, and everything we're going to see here now can also apply to log4j. It's like the logging model in Python is actually inspired in the Apache log4j. So you as a developer are going to be interacting with logger object, with the logger class, okay? The logger class can be seen as the gate where you pass the logs, and they magically appear in the string in a file or whatever, right? You just get the logger instance and you pass your message. You can have some placeholder and then pass those objects in, which will be interpolated when they are going to be emitted. And this is, when you are a developer, this is how you can think about logger, which is really beautiful. It's a great abstraction. But we both know in this beautiful heart, there is much inside. So something key within the logging model is what's named a log record. A log record can be seen as a packet that contains a lot of information about what's happening when you send this log line that we saw before. But this log record is an object, right? So how does that object actually goes to a file or to a line? And here's where we have to speak about handlers. So the logging handlers are what are going to take those log records that we just saw, and they're going to be sent to a file. So basically, You can see in the standard library there's already many classes for this. So you have a file handler, you have a stream handler. You can even send logs via email, FTP, HTTP, whatever you want. And what this is basically going to do is going to get the record, and for example, for a file handler, which are many subtypes inside it, but basically we'll get the record and put it into a file via a log line. You are wondering, still, this is an object, and we have to format it into a single line. And there are many formatters. So where's all this logic to convert an object into a single line, into a single string? So you have to speak about formatters. Formatters basically take this log record we speak about and convert it in a line. You can see the pattern here that all the logic is really nice abstracted within the logging model. I think the design of the logging model is amazing. It's something to be in love with. So now we say, okay, now we understand logging, right? So you get a logger, you pass a log message that you want to send, something is happening in the code of the logger, it's going to create a log record which is going to be emitted into the handler, one of many, because a logger can have multiple handlers, and the handler will call the formatter to get a string back that it can emit. That's more or less. There is also another component called filter, which allows you to fine-tune the decision of emitting or not a log line. Those can be present in both the loggers and the handlers. So getting a little bit more complex, we have a logger, which takes us the log message. Something happens in the logger. There's a filter that might filter out the logger because we don't want to log it. Then we create a log record, which is going to be sent to all the handlers, which also have the filter. It's going to have all the logic we set up for formatter. And then finally, our log is going to appear in a file, a stream, or whatever. We have to speak about the hierarchy. So we think when you get a logger, we haven't seen still before how to get a logger. You just do logger get logger, and you pass a nice and beautiful string. And what this string does is allows you to specify as a dot-separated string your hierarchy. What does the hierarchy mean? So here we can see that we have a child logger, which belongs to the parent logger, which belongs to the implicit, all-wonderful root logger. Why would this be useful? This allows you to do things like not defining the level that a logger is going to emit, like allow the logs to emit. And so whenever you have this hierarchy, if, for example, the child doesn't have a log level set, what's going to happen is that it's going to look into his parent and so forth recursively. Also, when you have the logger hierarchy, when a logger emits a log, it's also going to look in all the parent loggers. Better with the flow. So we get the log line, we pass it to a logger. The filter is going to tell us if it's OK to emit it or not. Then we pass it to all the handlers that we have, and we check. Does the logger object has propagate equals false? If it doesn't have propagate equals false, that means that it's OK to pass the object up. Does it mean that it's going to pass the log record to the parent logger? No. This is a huge pitfall that everyone falls. It's just going to call the handlers of the parent. It's not the same because, for example, it won't call the filter of the parent. It will just call the handlers of the parent. That's really important. So, OK, now we know how logger works, right? There's some small arrows I've been hitting, but I promise the next slide is the final flow diagram of how logger works. So you send the log line. OK, it's going to get into the logger. It's going to check the category because, as you see here, we are logging on info, and you can configure different categories in the logger. It's going to check if the logger is enabled or not. Then it's going to come the filter. It's going to go to all the handlers. There's also a category in the handlers. Okay, and this is the final flow. So it goes to the formatter, comes back. If propagate is not set to false, it will go to all the parent loggers. This is how it's presented to you in the logging documentation. I've done this going step by step because I found much easier to understand it and reason about the different logging components when you go one by one and you hide all the complexity, than rather just jumping into this huge flow diagram that I always get lost. OK, so we know how logger is built and how beautifully it's designed, but how do you actually use it? So really quickly, because you can just read this online, this is a sample on how you use logger as a user, as a developer that is just using the logger library to emit logs. So here we get a logger name. We'll see more about this afterwards. Then you can log a message at debug level. We run some code, we catch an exception, and then we call this logger exception. Exception is not a different category, it's just error, but it's also going to log the stack trace, the exception type, and some information about it. And there are some other parameters that you might like xinfo. It will log the stack info, and it's the same as doing exception. So exception is actually going to do error with xinfo equals true. And then stack info is if you want the same thing, but you are not in an exception situation. So you can just print the stack info at any point. Okay, so some common mistakes or some common misuse of login. This is worse. This can start a war worse than Vim versus Emacs. But if you want to log a string and you have some data that you want to put on it, you can do this. And nowadays, PyLint will consider this a lint violation, because what you should probably be doing is put the placeholder and pass the argument. Some people will complain that this can call what's called a Heisenbug, which means that everything is running fine. Then in prod, you enable debugging logs, and things are going to blow up. And if you blame me for that, I'm going to say it's your fault because you're not testing properly, because if you're testing and you have your level set to debug, you won't have this issue. Then next thing, how many times I've seen a terrible error has happened, data, right? If something raises a key error, what this is going to do is going to get the string representation of the exception, and the string representation of a key error is just the key that was missing, which is absolutely not useful at all. So please use either xinfo or log, or do login.exception, and you'll get the whole stack trace, the exception type, and the key value as well. This is life-saving. And oh yeah, and you don't even need to get the variable. Time. So quite often when you get the loggers, we saw that we can put a string, which is dot separator. But what you probably want to do is use name. When you use name, it's going to use the module name, which is going to align your logging hierarchy to your project hierarchy. So if you have a project called requests, and you have within the project called request a module called super requests, you're going to have a logger hierarchy of request and super request. Instead of having to manually create your logger hierarchy, it will just map how you have structured your files. Okay, so how do we configure all this beast, right? This is not when you are just creating a library and deciding how do you want to instrument it to log things, but how do you want all those logs to appear in your system as a person who is checking how everything is. So there are three ways. You can configure it by code, you can configure it with an ini file, or you can configure it by just passing a dictionary. So by code, there are two ways. You can specify all the different components that we saw before and plug them yourself, which is really tedious. Or you can use the nice and beautiful basic config, which is amazing whenever you have a script. So this is going to set up everything for you. Really important, do it before you log anything, okay? If you log at any point, the login library will actually run this for you with no parameters. And it has all kind of tuning options. So if you want the application to go to a file name, or you want a specific format or something, this will just translate what you say into the proper objects that we saw before. Next, if you want to really fine-tune a little bit more, you can just use a dictionary. Yeah, you can use a dictionary, and here you can see that you can specify all the objects that we spoke about before. So for example, we are configuring the root logger to have a single handler, which is the console. The console is actually defined here in the handlers, which uses the short formatter. The short formatter is configured here, which tells you how to make that log record that we spoke before into a single string. You can see we're also here configuring a logger called plugin. And because this is really verbose, we decided that we actually want only within the plugins to log things that are of level error or above. You might realize that there is no handlers here, and that's in purpose because what's actually going to happen is every single log that is handled by plugins will be then passed to the handlers of the parent. And that's it. We're going to run into the demo. You might wonder, I said 3 ways to configure it, and I only demo 2. It's because I don't like the file way to configure it, so I'm not going to present it. If you want to configure it with a file, just put this into a JSON file or a YAML one, and just read that. OK, so we're going to see how this line is going to sail through the guts of the login module. The login module is really easy to read. I would, now that if you already knew, once you understand the different components of login, I think it's worth just having a quick look through the login library in CPython because it's really easy to read. So we are going to do a small demo because there is no good presentation if someone is not failing in a demo. So I run Python 2.4. Now I run Python 3.6. I have some breakpoints already prepared because I know I'm not going to be able to type. And here, basically, we import login. We do the basic, the base. Oh, you're not seeing what I'm doing. That's better. So we import login. We do the basic config, and then we're going to get the logger and log something. OK, next. Let's get inside. Is there a blue here? Oh, there is some blue. OK, so it's going to be more fun. I'll read everything.
If you select the text.
Oh, good point.
Yes.
Is it better? Oh, wow. OK, so here we are into the login.info. So the first thing that we're going to check, as we saw in the previous diagram, is if the logger is enabled or not for that level. So here we see we do if self is enabled for info, and we can see what's the current level of the logger, right? So self.level is going to be 0, which is not set because it's actually set in the parent. And as we said, thanks to the hierarchy, we're going to check the parent if the child level is not set. So that's going to be yes. And then we can go into this nice, beautiful function called log, which contains the code for login on all the categories. So whenever you call log error, log info, or whatever, it's actually going to go inside here. OK, so we don't care about that. And here, the first thing we are doing is getting the file name and all the stack information we might care about to be able to build this log record we spoke about. That done. You can see here. Oh, yes, you told me. Yeah. So you can see here, we'll build this record we spoke about with all the information that we could find around it. So now, if you want to, you can see the record. And the record has a lot of user information that you don't have to log, but it's there for you to use. And thanks to this object being passed around, you can share information and decide in the different components how to use it. And then we go into handle the record. Done. So what do we do here? We check if it's disabled, and we check if any filter will actually filter out the record. We know that that's not the case, so we do call handlers. We go into the call handlers code, and we're still in the logger object, okay? But we are going through all the we are going through all the handlers that we have. I'm going to speed up a lot. Okay. So basically what we're doing here is we have a variable called C, which is getting the current logger, and we'll start to go up. Why will we start to go up? Because C, which is the current one, have no handlers. Why? Because C is the child logger that we use. The logger that is configured is the parent logger, right? So you can see here that it didn't have it, so we go to the parent. And now then we go to the parent. I think this is, if you didn't know this and you have to learn something today, I think this is the key. When you are going on the hierarchy, you don't call the parent logger. You get its handlers and you run them, okay? It's different as we saw before because it's not going to execute the filters. So now that we are in the parent, you can see that C is the root logger. That one actually has what? Oh no, it run continue. Well, you can see that this one is actually meeting the log. So now we are still in the call handlers. It's checking the level here, and because we saw that the handler as well can be configured on which level you want to start to emit logs. Because the level of the handler will allow the record to go through, it's going to go inside. Ta-da! And we can go into the code of the handler. And this is the code of the handler. I think this is really cool, because you can create your own handler and define how this log record is going to be serialized. So here, basically, we can see some code related to multi-threading that will allow you to run this in a multi-threading environment compared to print. And then it's going to emit it. And I still have a lot of slides. On emit, you're going to see that it's going to call the formatter. This self format is going to call the formatter. And ta-da, it appears here, hello, every Python, because the slides are reused. And so I should have changed that. OK, so we still have 3 minutes. Yeah. Cool. Great. OK, so let's see some sample advanced use cases of logging and how can you use it. So when you are configuring, you can have, I know I get the 12-factor apps and everything, but if you are really lazy and you don't have the tooling around it, sometimes it's even easier just to rely on the handlers on the login. So here you can see how I have specific handlers for requests because I want to log in the back all the requests, and I don't want to propagate it, and I want to have them in a single file. This will allow you to see how your application is interacting with other via HTTP. And then you can have different files with different levels because you want a rotating log handler and you want to see too much detail. It's going to be in the slides. In the notes is everything. You can log JSON. You can use filters. You can abuse of filters to add global information. This is useful, for example, if you want to correlate all the logs of a request in Flasks, right? So you're using Flask and you want to see I want to see all the logs that happened when I was handling those requests. Starting from Python 3.4, I think, there is a factory method that you can overwrite to do so. But this can give you an idea on how to do it. Buffering. Let's say that you want, for example, to get, you want to log debug messages whenever there is an error. Or you want to, here, what we are doing is, if there is an error, you want to log the last 2 infos, for example. So you can enrich the information that you have when an error happens. I'm going to jump this one. And that's it. I hope you like a logging model. I'm going to put the slides online, which have more content. There is also an article in opensource.com. If you look opensource.com Python login, which has much more information. And I hope you enjoyed seeing how logging is designed. I think it's really beautiful. It combines in a nice way inheritance and composition, and it allows you to plan them in ways that give you a lot of flexibility. That's it. I think we have 1 minute for question.
Yeah, we can take one.
Sorry.
So have we got a question? Oh, it's off. Hello, can you hear me now? Have we got a question for Jan? Yes. Sorry, no, that's Jan. You're Mario, sorry.
That's my guinea pig, in case there's a question.
What is your opinion on using logging and leveraging third-party resources like Sentry and Rollbar to help with logging?
Yeah. So actually, Sentry integrates quite nicely with it. It has once you plug Sentry, what it's actually doing, if I'm right, is adding a handler to your logging stack that will do that whenever an error happens, it will pass the log record to the Sentry handler. And they can do whatever they want there, which is really cool. So thanks to the way logging is designed, integrating tools like Sentry is really easy.
Cool. Mario will be doing that again as a 5-minute lightning talk later on this afternoon. If you could give him a round of applause.
Thank you very much.